If the Pennines are the backbone of Britain, the backbone of the Pennines is certainly that large lump of limestone centred on Whernside that runs from the Yorkshire Dales to the Scottish border. It's a hard rock, but it can be dissolved by rainwater, and over millions of years it has been, which is why, in a curious way, some local hillside farms have, alongside them, huts which are filled with young people who spend every weekend exploring the potholes and passages, the rushing underground streams, and the great silent caverns that honeycomb this entire area. That is, once they've slept off the effects of Saturday night.
Come on, wake up, chap, you lazy perisher.
It's not only a long walk to the cave entrance, it's a long climb, about 400 feet up the steep hillside with the hut and the valley far below. It's inside that hill that John Russell and the rest are going to spend the day. If you ask them why they do it, you get the usual answers. To find out something about your own nature, to get away from the world above, or to scare yourself so much you're only too glad to get back to the world above. There are as many answers as there are potholers. And this is where it all starts, a not very impressive hole in the hillside. Simpson Pot, named after the man who discovered the entrance just before the First World War, and then forgot about it for more than 30 years, when a new generation of cavers set about exploring it, taking their first steps into the unknown darkness.
When you first go in and you switch your light on, you can't see a thing. It seems just like a red glow on your helmet, and you keep tripping over rocks and all sorts of things that are on the floor, especially after going out of brilliant sunlight.
What's that, Boulder? I always find that I fall into every pool of water that is to be found. They seem to be bottomless, usually tripping over in the process. Also, the rocks seem to jump out and grab you. Everything gets in the way. Your feet are in the wrong place, your hands in the wrong place, all the holes are in the wrong place. That's all right now.
And now comes the first real obstacle. This is the last time the cavers will be dry on this trip. From now on, they'll be cold and wet every inch of the way. Ladders like this are only about 1/5 the weight of the old-fashioned rope ones and are much less bulky, which makes them far better for caving.
I think every caver has a certain aspect in potholing which frightens him most, whether it be climbing or tight passages or whatever. I personally can't stand water. I get very terrified of water, especially if there's only a limited airspace. I often wonder what it must have been like for the first chap to actually have dived through this particular part. He must have been very courageous and had a great deal of compulsion to drive him to do this.
But there's always the pleasure of trying to get your acetylene helmet lamp to light again. Slurp up some water from around your feet and blow it into the lamp. That activates the carbide, which gives off gas. If there isn't any water, you can always spit on it. And there are other body fluids that have been used in really dry caves. And now, after nearly 2 hours, we've got to the most difficult bit. Slit Pot, 230 feet below the surface. Slit Pot is like a vertical letterbox and about as easy to get through. You wriggle and squeeze and push, and all at once you've exploded through it. The trouble is, there's a 90-foot drop on the other side, so if you go through too fast, you'll also go through too far. The method Shep and the team are going to use is a new one in caving, although a well-known one in climbing. It's abseiling.
Slit pot is not technically difficult to start, but certainly for some of our bigger members of this trip, it's really tight and awkward, and you must remember that it's a bit rather like a cork out of a bottle. It's a good hard thrutch, and then you're suddenly away and find yourself falling unless you really control that last vital push as you splash through into the water.
Into the water? Yes, because you descend slit pot down a waterfall. And now it's the turn of the next one to struggle through the slit and start the dark descent.
Abseiling, it seems very difficult to get started on the rope. When you're going over the edge, you must always lean backwards so you can walk down the first stretch of wall. This means that somehow you're always thinking if the rope's going to part, it's going to part now, and you're going to plummet off backwards into the void. You seem very sort of reliant on this one thin piece of nylon cord which is attaching you to safety, and if anything at all happens to it, you're going to finish up on the rocks far below.
There seems to be a sort of gloomy relish in the words John Russell used then. It's hard to escape the feeling that he's actually enjoying the darkness, the damp and the danger, if only because it'll be so pleasant when it stops. But first, the waterfall down into the final chamber has got to be negotiated, and it isn't the easiest of obstacles after the long, tiring descent down from the surface. The force of the water is considerable and threatens all the time to sweep the caver away, quite apart from the little local difficulty there is in breathing in the middle of such a body of water.
Climbing in a spray, it's sometimes quite difficult to breathe. You tuck your chin into your chest and try and slurp the air out of the water. And if it gets in the back of your throat, it makes you cough and you get all crossed up with your breathing sometimes.
Caving is an activity that uses up a tremendous amount of energy. That energy has got to be replaced, so the food has got to have a high energy content. After a meal, a sleep. Dave Cobley is an expert in the art of instantaneous relaxation, but not even an expert is proof against people whose high spirits have come singing back as their blood sugar increases. John Shepherd was soon in trouble when the floor collapsed. Dangerous boulders everywhere, and no hope of progress until a diversion had been made. The headroom is still very low, and there's a long way to go in difficult conditions. Leslie Ulverston makes her cautious way along, cold, wet, and cramped. Difficult as the crawl is, it's typical of the fascination of caving, in that the way out of the big so-called final chamber should be such a tiny hole, and that, at its very welcome end, it should suddenly break out into another even bigger cave, the master cave. And breaking into a master cave is a caver's dream, because it's the key to the whole system, the cave into which all the streams of the area flow. Most master caves are below the water table, and so they're inaccessible. This one is the exception, and it brings back memories to John Shepherd.
The Master Cave brings back very happy memories to me of past friends who were involved in the other explorations, but were unfortunately caught out in a flood and drowned in Mossdale Caverns. I think this, personally, has made me a lot more cautious caver as regards water and outside weather conditions. One's got to be very wary and very conscious of what's going on the surface, although You can't see it after several hours underground. You haven't a clue whether it's raining or whether the sun's shining. So this is a factor you've got to be deeply in mind.
Traffic that's gone along the cave has sort of worn out a trough in the sand or silt at the floor. This means that a lot of the water levels have been lowered, and there was a time when the airspace itself was quite minimal, and in fact you can see the calcite line on the wall as to the true height of the water at that time.
Though the roof tunnel is 400 feet below the entrance, it's really very near the valley bottom. The first explorers of this roof tunnel suddenly saw signs of earthworms hereabouts, so they started to dig and very soon had broken through. It's taken our 5 cavers 5 hours to reach this spot. 5 hours of missing the sunshine, the sight of the hills, the sound of the birds, and the smell of the sweet fresh air before they reach the old oil drum casing that lets them pop up unexpectedly in the middle of a field, for all the world like something from a goon film. Why? Well, it's got something to do with the satisfaction you get from conquering primitive fears like fear of the darkness of water, of claustrophobia, and of pitting yourself against obstacle after obstacle and overcoming them. And it's got a lot to do with finding your real self. So on reflection, it might not be a bad way to spend a Sunday after all.